Hello everyone, and welcome to this second week of our course. In our previous sessions, we started exploring teaching for understanding, and now we are going to go deeper into it. Are you ready? We are going to see how to reach a plan based on teaching for understanding. As Bethlehemite English teachers and as Bethlehemite educators, generally speaking, these are concepts that we need to know from now on, because this is the language that we, as Bethlehemite schools, are going to be speaking in the near future. This is the framework itself, this is the core of teaching for understanding. Let's do it in 5 steps. Main questions, generative topics, understanding goals, performances of understanding, and ongoing assessment. Let's go through the first concept, main questions. If you do research on teaching for understanding and you look for documents about it, you will see that they will start right from generative topics, which in our case is going to be the second. That is a very interesting question. Why don't we talk about hilos conductores in English? Well, in Spanish we do that in Enseñanza para la Comprensión, but when we go through it in English, it doesn't appear. Well, in order not to leave behind this concept, we proposed this translation, main questions. These are questions that will be covered throughout the school year. By these questions, students and teachers will know what the year will be about. This is why it is very important that these questions are 100% clear, directly related to the field or the subject that you are teaching, and that they are broad enough so that students actually need the whole year to come up with a possible answer for that. Since it is a whole school year, these must be questions that look and sound interesting for both students and teachers. They should be engaging. Also, they must be known by everyone, students, teachers, coordinators, and so on. They must be very familiar for the students and therefore they should be public. If our intention is that students develop understanding, we need to make sure that their minds get hooked up by these questions. In order to do that, they have to be complex, they have to demand thinking, reflection, and therefore they cannot be answered by a simple yes or a simple no. Instead, start by using how to, what, which, and this way we will all be challenged to come up with more clever answers. These questions are tools for us to foster thinking in our classrooms. They cannot be simple or obvious questions because our aim is to have students take some time to carefully think and make their minds. Since we want our students to be as active and engaged as possible, we'll need to listen to them. They can even propose main questions and honest doubts that they have so that as a big team, we can all go through them. Let's remember that if these questions are going to be public, they need to be spoken or asked in a student language. Let's be careful with the words we choose. If we carefully think our main questions and if we involve our beloved students, they will definitely sound familiar to the students. This is vital, so that they feel close to learning. Last but not least, main questions could regard the 4 elements that we covered in our previous sessions: knowledge, method, purpose, and ways to communicate. These can be insights, inspiration for us to decide our main questions for the school year. And we have a real example. We took this book, Our World 4, and we had a careful look at all of its units. We came up with the following main questions for our school year with 4th graders. Why should we belong to a family? What has changed along history? What do we need to think when giving a piece of health advice? What is the purpose of entertainment? As we can see, we gave our best for these questions to be asked in a student spoken language to sound interesting, and we cannot answer them with a yes or a no. Let's remember that it is a whole school year. This means that it is very possible that topics are a little far from each other, especially if we are following a textbook. But don't worry, this doesn't prevent us from asking ourselves a number of main questions for our school year. Once we have decided our main goals, it's time for us to identify the topics, which in the case of teaching for understanding will be called generative topics. Let's see what they are about. Generative topics can be contents, ideas, facts. They are topics that make students feel passionate about them. Before, in CLIL, we worry a lot about identifying contents, identifying topics in a concrete and objective way. In teaching for understanding, we can be subjective. We can state and identify topics in a way that catches students' attention. In order to give you an example, in CLIL, we would have said that animals was a content, a topic. It is stated in a concrete and objective way. Now in teaching for understanding, we can put it in a fun way, which wasn't valid in CLIL. For example, we can state it as awesome animals, let's take a ride through the jungle, and so on. Fun names are more than valid in teaching for understanding, and actually they become necessary because they need to be engaging and they need to sound interesting. Let's not forget that topics need to be challenging but also reachable for the students. This means that we always need to be aware of the level of difficulty that topics imply. Let's never make them too easy because they become boring, but let's not make them impossible or too difficult either, because they become too frustrating, and we don't want any of those cases, right? In teaching for understanding, and actually most educational approaches, everything needs to be linked. If we stated a couple of questions before, which are our main questions for the school year, we need to make sure that our generative topics are going to be directly related to them. Also, we can make topics complement each other by relating them to different disciplines. The world in which we live intertwines disciplines and fields, because facts and events don't happen in an isolated way. This is why our students need to be involved in such thinking dynamics. Linking fields and linking disciplines allow us to compare, contrast, and reach deeper thoughts. We can see beyond the evident, and we can come to new realizations to which we hadn't come before. Probably we have said this so many times that you might be fed up with this, but it is something that we cannot ever forget in our teaching practice. The closer topics are to real life, the better and the more benefit it will mean for our students. So please, let's make it relevant, let's make it necessary, and let's make it interesting so that we can link the world outside with the world inside the classroom and the world inside our students' minds. And it is time for an example. Based on the main questions that we asked ourselves before, we identified a number of generative topics for the different terms through which we would need to go with 4th graders. These are inherited traits and family members, copy-paste, treasures in the past, fresh food versus canned food. We made an effort to make them sound appealing so that we can engage our beloved learners from the very beginning. Alright, so far we have covered main questions and generative topics. Once we have identified them and proposed them, it's our time to trace the goals, the objectives. In teaching for understanding, they are called understanding goals. When we find ourselves planning and setting our students' learning goals, we need to take into account that these goals cannot focus on actions, activities. Instead, they need to focus on our students' minds and our students' understanding development. In this sense, we really differentiate goals from activities and performances. Such goals need to be clear and known by the students. If they are told what they are expected to achieve and why, this will enlighten both teaching and learning. Let's make everything as clear, public, and fair as possible. Let's also make sure that the understanding goals that we propose can be measured and also assessed. This will help us to be objective when it comes to analyzing whether students achieved these goals or not. In teaching for understanding, we, as teachers, as pedagogists, and as planners, are required to come up with a question. Every goal should have a question that hooks students' minds into learning, that raises interest, that leads us to the development of understanding. If we have a question for each goal, we will have more curious students. Continuing with the example of our World 4, we have identified and also proposed the following understanding goals. Let's see. Students will develop understanding about their relatives' physical traits and they will be able to compare them. Students will develop understanding on the traits that they have inherited and where they came from. Students will develop understanding on the conditions food need to be healthy and fresh. Students will develop understanding about the language structures that they need in English to talk about the past. As you see, some of them were related to the topics, some other ones to language. We have been given a tip, and it's a formula. Students will develop understanding on, or students will develop understanding about, but we can add other verbs to that. We could say, for example, students will develop understanding, raise awareness, be sensitive about this or that topic, and this way we would have more possibilities than only saying students will develop understanding. And for these goals, we have proposed the following questions. What similarities and differences can I find among my relatives? Where do my traits come from? What to do to keep food fresh and healthy? How can I talk about what the past was like? Now let's focus on performances of understanding. The word performance implies a level of difficulty, a level of elaboration. This is why we cannot confuse performances with activities. Performances have clear intentions and have been carefully designed and proposed by us, teachers, for our students to engage in learning and to develop understanding, and since we teach English, to develop abilities and skills as well. Performances are wise and carefully thought action cycles that promote learning and that require students to be active with their knowledge. Students are asked to do, not to listen and memorize. The intention of having performances is that if we ask our students to be active in learning, it is easier for us to see and confirm whether our students are learning and understanding or not. This is why performances of understanding make not only thoughts but also thinking visible. In order for a performance to be a performance, it requires active engagement from the students. They need to be emotionally and cognitively engaged in it. Students also need to be clear on the goal and the purpose of such performances. Let's not forget, they are the ones who do, we are the ones who facilitate. Performances should be varied. As teachers, we, and whatever we propose, cannot become predictable. If we become predictable, we have a big loss: engagement. We know it is not easy, especially since we teach on a daily basis. However, there are techniques that we can save for specific times and that can keep the motion going. A little parenthesis here is that you can get some inspiration in Obi, the online bank of ideas that we have designed for you. You can get ideas and also share yours. The performances that we propose in our plans need to refer to different contexts. This makes learning dynamic and also relevant. Let's enjoy our students' enthusiasm to know the world and let's explore it together. Let's not ever forget mental workout, thinking routines. You can remember the ones that we have done so far, but you can also create yours. And actually, that's something that you're going to be doing in week 3. We have done connect, expand, challenge, and we've also done I used to think and now I think. Remember? In our course about 4 C's? Well, thinking routines keep our minds awake and they can be as dynamic and engaging as our creativity allows. It is really important to bring them to class. Our students will benefit a lot from such mental workout. Let's not ever forget that performances of understanding are also coherent with constructivism. In this sense, they elicit students' prior knowledge in order for them to build new one upon it. Since everything is linked, these performances have to relate to the understanding goals that we proposed before, and for sure, the generative topics that we identified above. Here, we need to take into account the stages that we mentioned in week 1, exploring, guided research, and final synthesis project. They give us insights on the kind of performances that we can propose. And here we have a few more examples. This is an exploring performance in which students will ask questions to their parents about physical similarities and differences among their relatives. Also, students will identify the relative from whom he or she inherited this or that physical trait by designing a traits chart. This is a guided research performance. And we have a final synthesis project here, and it says that students will make a big book on family features. Last but not least at all, ongoing assessment. And in this point, you might be wondering why we are saying assessment and not evaluation, which is a more frequently used term. Well, let's see why. Evaluation implies a judgment, and it's usually limited by a judgment of right or wrong, correct or incorrect. And we, as pedagogists, need to go beyond. We need to provide feedback to accompany a process, to provide support, scaffolding, and that is assessment. Assessment goes beyond evaluation, and it also implies qualitative support, not only quantitative scores. It is called ongoing assessment because it doesn't wait until the end of a term for it to happen. Ongoing assessment occurs on a frequent basis. It is highly important that our students feel accompanied and supported throughout all times at different paces and degrees. This is why ongoing assessment needs to involve students. It has to be conscious. If we ask students to be active during the performance, they can also be active when receiving feedback and being assessed formally and informally. We can vary, and actually we should, because we have a number of assessment resources. We have ourselves, teachers, but we also have students themselves. Therefore, peer and self-assessment are alternative ways that we should consider in our teaching practice. Ideally, students should know what they're doing well and what they could improve on a frequent basis, and why not, day by day. In order for our assessment to be transparent and meaningful, it is advisable that we set clear, explicit, official, and public assessment or evaluation criteria with our students. Such criteria need to be directly linked to the goals and need to be open to different ways to demonstrate understanding. This will avoid us a lot of headaches, and it helps us to make sure that we're being fair with all students. The role of feedback is highly vital, and we really need to make sure that we are aware of the different sources of it. Not all the time does it have to come from the teacher. No. Instead, students can also assess themselves and provide each other feedback. Parents can also play a key role in providing feedback as long as they receive clear orientations from the teachers and that they have the time and motivation to do it. Also, let's make sure that students are given the explicit chance to apply it. There is no sense in knowing what we did better and what needs to be improved if we're not going to apply it in the near future. This is a very important pyramid that Coordinator Luz Meri from Bello Antioquia shared with us. It shows that we can provide students with different kinds of feedback. It can be done formally and informally. It can be verbal, non-verbal, it can include gestures, it can be done in a written but also in a performed way. And as we said before, it's not only the teacher the one who can give feedback. Classmates, parents, and students themselves could also do it as long as it is done appropriately. As teachers, we can give them orientations. Since teaching for understanding implies a shift of paradigms, it means new opportunities to teach, new opportunities to learn, and also new opportunities to assess and evaluate. Many of us have had this question: how to vary the outcome? How not to become predictable when it comes to evaluating and assessing? Well, to start with, Bloom's taxonomy shows us not only cognitive processes that we can and that we should foster among our students, but it also shows us the products that we can ask from them, and also the cognitive process that is being fostered when we ask such a product. Quizzes, written exams, and oral presentations have been around for quite a long time, and probably they still will. But since we are innovative and curious teachers, we can also evaluate and assess through inventions, games, experiments, interpretations, different genres and facts around the world, photographs, television shows, and well, many other possibilities. We hope this taxonomy helps as an inspiration and as insights for you to come up with your own innovative and engaging alternatives to evaluate and assess. If you want good ideas and you want to share yours as well, remember that you can always do that in OBI, our online bank of ideas. Teaching for Understanding has such an interesting proposal for teachers to consider when giving feedback. It is represented in these tiers. According to Teaching for Understanding, it is advisable to first identify the aspects that were unclear during the student's performance. Once we ask the students about them, we will be able to provide fair and better feedback. This is why we need to lighten up our doubts about the performance, and when students are performing, we need to know that it is more than natural that we as teachers may have confusions. Then, when we are clear on all the data that the performance gave us, we need to appreciate what was well done, and also the fact that students were sharing their abilities and ideas with us and the classroom. This will make our feedback constructivist and therefore meaningful. By doing this, we will strengthen an understanding culture around the classroom and also a collaborative environment. Let's not forget to use support tone in our voice when pointing out students' strengths during their performance. Moreover, in the case of complimenting them, let's be honest with our compliments. The next step is to express our concerns. Let's tell our students the worries and the problems that we identified in their performance. Let's also mention the ideas with which we don't agree, and let's negotiate with them if we can come to a common conclusion or to an agreement. We can't and we shouldn't express our feedback in negative and strong, unkind judgments. Instead, let's be friendly and clear with our suggestions, without forgetting to support them. This is the final step, to suggest. We have a few formulas, like why don't you consider doing this, or what about doing that, or why not doing this or that? A better way to do this might be, and so on. What is important here is that we remain kind, clear, and relevant in the feedback that we provide. An awesome idea is to elicit feedback from students themselves. Instead of showing explicitly what to improve, why don't we make students come to those conclusions by themselves? We need to guide them with questions such as, what would you improve? Why would you improve that? And any question that we need in order for our students to reach feedback by themselves. This raises awareness and consciousness among our students. It is a metacognitive and reflective way for students to get feedback, and also we would be fostering autonomy among our students. Let's not show them or tell them everything. Let's guide them and let's make sure that they get there by themselves. Alright, those were the concepts that we needed to cover in this session. Now it's time for another thinking routine. We created this one. It's called I feel, I think, and I will. Tell us your feelings, your thoughts about this session and the content that we dealt with here, and also your commitments for the future in terms of teaching for understanding. Also, we have something important to share with you. This planning template was provided by Maria Jimena Barrera and Patricia Leon, our Teaching for Understanding assessors and trainers. With the information of this session, try to complete this template. How would you do it? How would you face it? Try to plan a term based on this template, and then you can upload it here. It doesn't have to be perfect, it is just an exercise. And also, if you want to reflect upon the similarities and differences about this template and the one that is being used at your school, you will get extra points for that. Is there a way to combine them? How would you actually do it? Well, we hope that this session was very interesting and that you enjoyed teaching for understanding as much as we are. Thank you for staying around, and see you in week 4 and week 3.